Welcome back, everybody. So, re-elected DA leader John Steenhuisen says it is now time for the party to ensure that leading up to the 2012, the 2024 general elections, groundwork is done through campaigns that seek to grow support. Delivering his acceptance speech, Steenhuisen says he will go all out to ensure that the ANC dips below 50% of the vote next year. Steenhuisen will lead the DA for the next 3 years and also play a pivotal role in taking the party to the 2024 general elections. He was up against former Johannesburg Mayor, Dr. Mpho Phalatse, for the position. Now, the new DA leader is in studio with us this morning. John, congratulations.
Thank you, Leanne, and great to be here with you this morning.
Yeah, so how are you feeling this morning after what was quite a vibrant weekend for you, no doubt?
A little bit tired, I'll be honest, and probably 1 or 2 glasses of champagne too many last night. But the work starts today, so up and at 'em and ready to move towards the 2024 election.
Yeah, which are around the corner, and that's the reality. Is that
Correct.
in election time and getting the voters to believe in you and to vote for the DA, you've got a lot of work ahead of you, and I imagine that planning is already in the pipeline.
Yes, of course, and I think that the Congress, a very successful Congress we had this weekend, is essentially the party's launch pad now into the 2024 election. We've now got the leadership election behind us. The leadership now is a mandate, and obviously this allows us to move now into full speed and top gear to prepare for those elections. Very, very critical elections. The next one, I think it's make or break time for South Africa.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, let's reflect a little bit now on you as a leader. We've seen you in this position under very, very tough times for the DA. You're now coming back in. You've got another 3 years to go, and the DA in a very interesting position, because this is, I think, a make or break for the DA, and I think a lot of people are thinking that as well. But in your thought process, help us understand, what does the DA stand for?
Well, we stand for the values of freedom, fairness, opportunity and diversity, and around 4 major key principles which we believe are going to be the foundation stones of building a new majority in the country. Non-racialism, respect for the rule of law and the Constitution, a social market economy that treats the private sector and businesses partners in the growth agenda, and building a capable state free of corruption and cadre deployment. And I think that these are the foundation stones upon which we hope to form this Moonshot pact that's going to unseat the ANC next year. It is make or break time for South Africa, and I think many, many people, both locally and internationally, are watching this next election very, very carefully to see whether there's going to be any change in this trajectory of poverty, unemployment, and lack of investment that we're currently on, and something that's going to get South Africa onto a new path of hope and prosperity.
Yeah. I want to talk about the issue of anti-racialism. Let's start there, because whenever a conversation comes up about the DA, race is always at play, and fair enough. I mean, when we look at the new elected leadership, I mean, there were two things at play, because yesterday we saw taking to the podium some unbelievably young, dynamic speakers from the different provinces in leadership positions that are looking fantastic, and this is a great indication of what South Africa should look like, and that's very comforting. However, once the leadership votes come in, and then we see the picture of the leadership there, it's dominated by white men, and that's just the way it is. So when you talk about this anti-racialism, it's hard to see that when, in fact, the people in control are white men.
Yeah, well, it's not anti-racialism, it's non-racialism, and that's precisely seeing people not as envoys of their race, but as individuals. I think if you look at our leadership team, it's the most diverse of any leadership team on any party, to both the left and right of us on the spectrum. The ANC's top 6 is monochromatic. The EFF's top 6 is monochromatic. The Freedom Front's top 6 is monochromatic. There's the DA, black, white, Indian and coloured people represented in our leadership. And I think that there's a disproportionate focus on the DA when it comes to race, and there's a criteria that's applied to us that somehow is not applied to other parties. And I don't think that's fair. I think that people who see things on the racial abacus are always going to be disappointed in the DA no matter what, because we don't elect people based on their colour of their skin. We elect people based on merit. And I think that anybody looking at the Congress this weekend, looking at the Congress floor, looking at the young leaders, and I'm very glad you've noticed that, because it's been a determined effort of the party under my leadership to grow a pool of new talent that's going to be able to take the party to the next level, and future leaders of the party amongst them. I think that you can see South Africa represented in all its diversity.
It certainly is, but I mean, realistically, when you do look at the top leaders of the party, and I think that the DA are more scrutinized because you are the official opposition party, and rightly so. You deserve to be scrutinized. But when we do look at that top leadership, it isn't representative. John, you and I can see that in the top leadership. I mean, it is... The pictures and the faces there may scare some voters away, thinking...
I disagree fundamentally.
Good, tell me why.
I disagree fundamentally because I think if you look at the recent polling that's been done, by far the majority of South Africans, black and white, believe that people should be appointed on merit, not on race. The Social Research Foundation's polling that came out last week, particularly on merit-based appointments, shows that very clearly. Dr. Ivan Meyer is not a white male. He is a coloured male South African. Solly Malatsi is not a white male. He is a black male. Ashwin Sarupan is an Indian South African. Helen Ziller is a white South African. So I think that when you see the DA, I think that what you see is South Africa represented, but also people have been elected there based on their ability to do the job. It's also reflected in the DA's support base, because in that same study that was released 2 weeks ago shows very clearly 32% of the DA's support comes from black South Africans, 31% of it from coloured South Africans, 7% from Indian South Africans, and 30% from white South Africans. It is by far the most diverse support base, which shows that the DA is making inroads across all communities in South Africa.
Yeah, well, we wish you the best of luck on that. But I mean, some sentiments that, you know, we do ask our viewers how they feel about it. And you know, some of them do. They come out and they very much so. You know, here's one, Trevor, saying, I'm happy for the DA because his election means race polarization will continue at the DA in their efforts to win back the racists they lost during Musi's era, which inevitably means they will lose the black vote. Blacks must see them for who they are. And that's just one. I just opened it and that was the first one that came to me. So, I mean, these are genuine concerns that I'm giving you the platform to explain, and you are. And that's not how you see yourselves, obviously.
It's not as we see ourselves. We don't regard you as a white South African and see you as that. We see you as a presenter who's able to do her craft and do it to the best of her ability, and does it very well, I might say. Yeah. So I think that's very important that we move away. Race has been the single determinant factor that's destroyed South Africa. And I think if we continue to layer race-based policies and race-based issues on top of that, we're never going to move forward as a country. And I also find it odd because nobody asked Barack Obama when he was standing for president of the United States, well, as a minority, who do you think you are? No one asked Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, well, Asians are only 7% of the British population. Why are you the Prime Minister? He's there, and both of them were there because people have chosen them to lead based on their abilities. And I think we need to start as a country moving past just seeing each other as envoys of our race and seeing each other as South Africans that have a contribution to make to building this country, and that we should be judged on that contribution and on nothing else.
Yeah, all right. I'm going to leave it there because there are so many more I can go into. But it's a
Twitter's a terrible place.
It is, but it's not only Twitter. It's what people feel and think, and I think you're explaining it, which is important. It's important to get the message across because Twitter is a very. It's a small segment of what people feel, but some people do feel that way, and you need to address it.
I think there's also another important point, Dan. I mean, I've got an 83% majority this weekend, which is obviously a wonderful mandate. But by far the bulk of the Congress delegates in that convention hall, and you can see it from your footage, were not white South Africans. They were South Africans who were black, Indian, and coloured. And they've put their faith in me as a leader because they have faith in my ability to be able to lead the party going forward.
All right, let's park race for now. Let's talk about your absolute and utter vision and your main goal to keep the EFF out of power.
Yeah.
How can that be your main goal? They're smaller than you.
Well, that's not the main goal. The main goal is to get the ANC below 50%. Because there's going to be no change in South Africa if the ANC keeps their majority. What I have said, however, is that the EFF, I believe, presents the single biggest threat to South Africa's socio and economic well-being. One looks at their policies, one looks at their behavior over the course of the last few years, the race baiting, the race polarization, the violence, the disruption, and the chaos. I think that is the last thing that South Africa needs. I worry too because I see how extractive they've been on the ANC from the opposition benches, dragging them down the rabbit hole of expropriation without compensation, nationalizing the Reserve Bank, prescribed assets, all of those things. And I worry that if the ANC falls below 50%, they're able to just simply form a coalition with the EFF. And I think that would be what I called doomsday for South Africa, because you will see capital flight, you will see lack of investor confidence, and those policies, if applied, will have the same result they've had everywhere they've been applied. By example, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Cuba, anywhere where those radical Marxist Chavez-style politics is played out, it always ends in misery, suffering, and unemployment.
So let's look at the EFF and your sides, because, I mean, you guys have got a history together in some coalitions, but we'll get to those now. But so a lot of people calling it and looking at it and saying, well, here goes the DA fear-mongering, because because you're exactly who you've explained is some of your voter constituency, those that have investments, particularly the middle class to the upper class, to those that do have the money and the means and the assets, and the worry that this will be taken away from them and everything will fall apart. So do everything you can to get rid of the EFF, and in order to do that, vote for us, the DA. And some people see this as a way to gain votes, is to fill South Africans with fear that if that party grows, there will be chaos.
Well, let me just start by saying I think that the biggest losers in an ANC-EFF tie-up, excuse me, will be the poor in South Africa, because the people that you speak about, the people who've got assets and money, can privatize their education, can privatize their security services, have the ability to send money ashore, and probably have the potential to be able to immigrate if things go wrong. The poor in South Africa are condemned to using government services, government hospitals, state education, government services at a municipal level, and rely on the SAPS to keep them safe. If the EFF and the ANC were to get together and those policies were applied, it is the poor in South Africa who would suffer the most, just as they're suffering the most out of the terrible economic decisions that have been taken, which is why we have over 30 million South Africans living below the poverty line of 992 Rand a month. It's not acceptable. They are bearing the brunt of it. They can't go to a private hospital. They have to take their health concerns to a state hospital. And when those crumble, it leaves them vulnerable. It's why we've got 3-year-old Langalam Viki dying a terrible death in a pit latrine in the Eastern Cape, because you've got a government that doesn't care, and poor people have no choice other than to use those services.
Yeah. Let's go again. I still want to linger a little bit on the EFF and
Sure.
the comments that you made yesterday. I mean, if we go back to when you and the EFF came together, and that was the time when Herman Mashaba came in, they voted with you. They gave you the votes. They did the same for Tanya Campbell, giving you votes and bringing the DA into these leadership positions. What went wrong? What has happened between that sort of alliance? Did it all start going wrong during Herman Mashaba's time?
Yeah, well, it started pretty soon after that. But let me tell you what the fundamental problem is. If you look at those 4 key values I spoke about, non-racialism, respect for the rule of law and the Constitution, a social market economy, and a capable state, and you overlay the EFF 7 pillars on that, you can see they're completely incongruous. There's no ways that we could work together, because their policy goals are very, very different to our policy goals. Their outcomes are very different to the outcomes that we have when our policies are applied. And what happened is, pretty soon after that we got into power in a place like Joburg, the extraction started. Appoint this person into this job. The fleet contract tender must go to this person. And it was the same rent-seeking and the same buddy-buddy dealing behind the scenes and closed cronyism that we'd seen previously in the ANC government. And eventually, the DA's mayor ended up dancing to the EFF's tune rather than dancing to the DA's tune. So I think there's one thing worse than not getting into government, and that's getting into government and not being able to govern according to your values and principles, and being able to set the clear difference between your government and what has gone before that you've replaced.
So, I mean, we can look at some faults that the DA, there are many faults of the DA, you know that.
Yes,
Let's just say Tshwane. I mean, just one word, Tshwane, which has been an absolute shambles. And one of the things that the DA promises is to do things differently, and it's this kind of with integrity, and to do things transparently and make things work. We take Tshwane and the Auditor General report that basically comes out scathing, basically saying in the financial year there were billions of rands in assets that were unaccounted for. So Randall Williams, what's happened to him? because he was there at the time. He's not there anymore. He's not the mayor anymore. But he's not in jail. He's not behind bars. He hasn't been held accountable for this. In fact, we see Peter Sutton, who was also there at the time, back in a financial position. Help us understand this. You preach, but are you practicing?
Yes, of course we practice what we preach. But again, it's very, very difficult. Tshwane has deep legacy issues that go back a long way. And it's been very, very difficult to turn the finances around. But what happened in Tshwane is not acceptable. And that is why there have been consequences for the person who was involved as the mayor. We hold our people in the DA accountable for their behavior. I don't think there's any institution in the world, including the SABC, that can insulate itself against people who are in the organization and then don't perform or perform in a way that's contrary to your ethos and your values. But I think you judge parties and organizations on how they deal with this when this happens. We haven't, moved Randall to some other key position in the municipality. He has given up the mayoralty. We've now put Silia's Brink into the mayoralty with the help of our multi-party coalition partners in Tshwane, and we are committed to turning that city round. So I think that you judge an organization by how it deals with things when they go wrong. Now contrast that to what happens in the ANC, where you commit a terrible bungle in your department, you get simply moved to another ministry. Or you are an official, a corrupt official in municipality A, you're moved along and suddenly you pop up in municipality B as municipal manager where you carry on. So I think that there is accountability and consequences in the DA, which is so sorely lacking in many other parts of it. And we are committed to turning Tshwane around. Yeah. And I've no doubt that in the space of a year, we will start to see major differences there in Tshwane. It is difficult, though, because it is a multi-party coalition, and those things are not easy to manage on a, on a daily basis, but we've got to try and make them work.
Let's talk again to the Auditor General, because, these reports were quite scathing. You talk about accountability, but how is Randall being held accountable?
But I think that, you've asked why is Randall not in jail? Because he hasn't committed any criminal conduct. If you look at what the Auditor General is saying, very little of that was in the purview of the mayor. Where I accept there's responsibility is that there should have been better oversight by the mayor and by the other councillors in that municipality. But however, if you look at the criminal wrongdoing, that is at the official level. A mayor is the head of the municipality. The city manager and the officials are responsible for the day-to-day running of the municipality. And yes, the elected representatives are there to exercise oversight. And I'm happy to concede that I think the ball was dropped in Tshwane, and we take responsibility for that, which is why we hold our people accountable. But the criminal conduct is at the level of those city officials who were ducking and diving, moving money around, issuing contracts, etc. That's where the criminal element lies in. You can't hold the president criminally liable because a director general in the Department of Public Works has stolen money. I think that there is a clear distinction there between the roles and responsibilities. And yes, the ball was dropped. We've taken action, but I believe that criminal charges have been laid against the officials concerned, and we will pursue those.
But just as you were saying, you want the president to be held liable for a lot of things that gone wrong.
Not criminally.
But the buck stops at the leadership, and the leadership is the mayor. And that was where the leadership should be held to account.
And that's why he's no longer the mayor.
Okay, we could talk about this for a while, but there's a lot more to talk about with what you've said. Your relationship with the ANC. So you've written the EFF off and said you're not going to go into coalitions with them. ANC, would you go into a coalition with them?
Well, the first shot that we want to take, and I call it the Moonshot pact, is to get like-minded opposition parties together with civil society to see if we can sit around a table and come to some common thrust where we can build a new ecosystem of change that will unseat the ANC and keep the EFF out. That is my first prize. I want to govern with like-minded opposition parties so we can get a trajectory of change. However, there's a second nightmare scenario for South Africa, and that is that the ANC and the EFF tie up. And I think that would be disastrous for the country and will set South Africa very quickly on the path towards a failed state. So I've said yesterday very clearly, I want a coalition of the willing and like-minded to be able to go and form this government. However, if that is not possible, or if that falls short, we must do everything in our power as the DA to prevent an ANC-EFF tie-up. And so it's going to be very important to see where the chips fall in 2024, because that's going to show how we have to play our hand.
So if we look at previous elections, I mean, let's go with the local government elections, because those were the easiest and most recent to look at. How can you possibly come into the majority when we look at the sort of voting patterns that they are? I mean, local government elections in 2016, DA it was at 24.6%, the ANC 55.7%. Then we fast forward to 2021. The DA lost over 4% of the votes. You went down to 20%, and the ANC went down to 47%. The EFF was the only party that went up. Now, how with that amount of votes, and you look at smaller opposition parties who really do get small amounts of votes, how are you planning on unseating the ANC with these kind of figures?
Well, there's two strategies, obviously. The one is to make sure that the DA grows, and we actually grew from the 2019 election. The party unherited actually grew, and I think it was 21.7% that we ended up with in the last election. Collectively, that opposition is 32%, if you take the 2019 figures, the non-EFF opposition. We've got to now grow that, which means that those small parties and the smaller parties have got to go into the hunt and bring out their voters and maximize turnout. But the DA's also got to grow its percentage share of the vote. And then to be able to encourage the millions of South Africans who are not registered, and also those who are registered but do not vote, to give them the hope that here is a chance of an opposition working together in the best interests of the country to ensure that we can bring that change. I think that if you look at what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal, for instance, it is the great model. It is the IFP and the DA working together constructively and maturely in a form of arrangement where we stood back for them in an election when they had the better chance of unseating the ANC, and we encouraged our voters to vote for them. We succeeded. They did the same for us recently in Pietermaritzburg, and collectively, we've taken more seats off the ANC. So my hope is that this Moonshot pact, the whole can be greater than the sum of its parts, and that we will be able to unseat the ANC. The DA is already the largest party in urban South Africa, and we overtook the ANC last year as that to take that particular position. I think that by the time the 2024 election rolls around, given load shedding, given the poverty and hunger, given the inflation crisis in South Africa, given the rising cost of living, I think more and more South Africans are going to walk away from the ANC and start looking at other parties that are not only talking about the solutions, but are showing South Africans where we govern that we can get things done and turn things around. We're going to end load shedding in the city of Cape Town and other DA-run municipalities. We are already stepping in to keep people safe when the national police system fails. And I think that being able to show rather than tell will inspire many more South Africans to say these guys are serious about the future, and more importantly, they've got a plan to get me out of poverty into a job and onto the ladder of opportunity.
All right, we leave it there. This is an opportunity for the party. You there at the helm. Let's see how it goes. Good luck. Thanks for talking to us. It's we've actually got another minute and a half. They've just scored another minute. Let me ask you this.
They're obviously enjoying it.
Probably they really are. Let's talk about. I want to see your predictions for the ANC because obviously Phala is a big issue for you as well. So like I say, we've got a minute and a half, but. The leadership under the presidency, if we do see Ramaphosa no longer there, because I think you are, in a way, a fan of President Cyril Ramaphosa. He talks a lot to some of your policies. He does. Let's not kid. Paul Mashatile, if he comes in and takes over as the leader of the ANC, what do you think will happen?
First, I want to say I'm not a fan of the president. I think
you guys work well
he's the best
together.
of a bad bunch, I think.
Okay.
So I think it's a famous question in politics, compared to what? And compared to what else is in the ANC, I think he does stand out. I haven't got the measure of Mr. Mashatile yet. I was very disappointed by his first outing in Deputy President's questions, where he seemed to infer that the tyranny of the majority is justified. And he was rightly called out by the DA, but also by former President Thabo Mbeki, who wrote a scathing letter saying, this isn't how democracy works. So I think we'll start to see his measure. I hope that he rises to the occasion, and I hope that he is certainly a better deputy president than his predecessor. And I suppose if he spends more time in the country than in Moscow, he'd already be doing a better job than Mabuza. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he develops in the parliamentary context and whether he can rise to the occasion.
Do you think that Ramaphosa will get to 2024 with Phala hanging over his head?
Well,
should he get to 2024?
Well, look, I think he's got some questions to answer. And the big problem now is that we don't have those answers. So it's very difficult to determine. I happen to think he is guilty of a conflict of interest, and that was the basis of the complaint to the public protector. Whether that is an impeachable offence will only be teased out once we have all the facts on the table. I don't think you or I or the viewers have the real facts of what really went down at Phala a game from, and where those dollars came from, how they got into the country, and what they were intended for, and why they were stuffed under a couch. When those become clearer, I think we'll be able to be in a position to be able to determine what the president's fate should be.
John Vuligate, thank you. Thanks for talking to us on Morning Live. Re-elected as the DA leader, John Steenhuisen, talking to us about a range of issues, but the centre of it all, his vision for the party going into 2024.